we're back here again. Oz and Charlie and Kieron on their English wine rambles. I'm being joined today, as usual, by Oz Clarke, author of the book on English wine, which of course you can get on the Forever Thirsty website, and Kieron Atkinson from the English Wine Project, a winemaker in his own right. So today we are going to join the owners of the famous Rathfinny Vineyard in Alfriston, near Battle, where William the Conqueror landed, in Sussex. So, without further ado, we're going to try the first wine, which is the classic Cuvée Brut. So, Oz, we charged our glasses. You're using your funny old glass again, are you?
This is not a funny old glass, Charlie. This is a beautiful glass. It's my wedding day glass. And as you know, I shall take it to my grave with me, unbroken, unless I spend too much time with you. But this is showing everybody the label of our Rathfinny here. Yeah. And I pour myself a nice foaming glass. You presumably are. Yeah. You see, you're doing this thing of you're using a true wine glass, and I'm doing a flute. Because
okay. I know what we
used
to do is I'll find something a little bit more suitable next time.
No, because it's very trendy at the moment to do what you're doing, which is to actually drink your fizz out of a white wine glass. I just happen to prefer the joy and the sparkle and the bubble and the celebratory side of drinking it out of this rather beautiful flute, which I have owned and loved for many years.
Well, like you.
Well, Oz, do you drink red wine out of that beautiful glass as well?
Not unless I'm really forgetting exactly what I'm doing, Kieron, which does occur occasionally. No, I don't. I've often thought of which red wine glasses do I prefer, and I've done various tests with sort of Zalto versus Riedel kind of tests, which are a lot of the wine glasses prefer Zaltos. I find myself saying, if I want to see a wine absolutely naked, without any makeup on, without any clothes on, Zalto is really good for that.
Yes.
But if I want to get the joy out of a wine, I think Riedel is better for bringing out the indulgence, the pleasures, the joys of the wine, even if it's not quite so good for seeing warts and all. So on the whole, I use Riedels because I prefer joy.
Quite right too. Quite right too. So, guys, talk us through this classic cuvée.
It's quite a serious wine.
It is.
And I think this is something that obviously Rathfinny set out to do straight away, because this is a serious project in a very beautiful part of Sussex. You can stand on the top of the vineyard and you can see the Seven Sisters, those wonderful chalk cliffs developing only a couple of miles away from you, and you can see the English Channel on a good day just glittering over Seaford Head there, and so it's a big project, and it's been started from absolute scratch. And I think that it's ambitious, and this wine is ambitious. You could have made it a little softer. You could have made it maybe a tiny bit sweeter, because this is pretty dry wine. And it's almost as though it's saying, I'm not asking for any favors. I want you straight away to take me as a really serious, high quality sparkling wine.
I totally agree, Oz. At the same time, I think it's very direct. I really like the pressure. I think people will really like the pressure, i.e. it's got good pressure. And I think you're right. And looking at the label, show the label again. They're very proud of the scenery and of the countryside. And I think that it feels terroir driven.
Yeah.
And I know the land a little bit around there. And I think it really is. I can almost taste the soil. I can almost kind of, that minerality. It really shines through.
It does, and in fact, not quite so much on the classic Cuvée. I think it shines through slightly more on some of their other wines. But I agree with you. There's a chalkiness which is it's not that sort of slightly meaty, reductive minerality, which I often think is nonsense. It's nothing to do with the soil at all. This has got an austerity
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you'd actually pulled apart some of that soil and gone and seen this pale white stuff underneath and crumbled it in your hands and somehow transferred a little bit of that crumbly dryness into the wine. I think this is good stuff. And I also think this is the 2016, and I think that it's considerably improved upon the earlier releases. And you know, 16 was it was a year which was, it ended up, I think people were pretty pleased with their grapes in 16, but the yields were fairly small. Was it a fairly late vintage again, Kieron, 16?
Yes, it was. It wasn't a perfect year, but it by no means was a bad one. It was pretty good for sparkling, I would have thought.
Okay, well, let's move on to the second wine.
Okay.
Which is the Rathfinny Blanc de Noir Brut.
Got it. There we are.
This is more Pinot Noir, this.
It's very much more Pinot Noir, but it does say on the label Pinot Noir dominated, which means he's probably got some Pinot Meunier in there.
Yeah,
and I think they've got quite a bit of Pinot Meunier planted, so that makes sense. But this color, if you see the color coming out, you probably mentioned this. Do you see? Look at Charlie's there.
Yeah.
It's got a hue to it.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy to see that in a Blanc de Noir because it's made entirely of black grapes, and you can feel that the skins have just given a little more in this wine than in the wine before. I like that slightly sort of burnished gold kind of color.
I really like that as well. I wonder at what stage does it become rosé? When do you go, that's now pink? As a maker, it's very popular now, isn't it, to kind of like those Provence pinks, and it's definitely got a hue, but it's not by no means pink.
I'm getting a little bored with some of those Provence type incredibly pale pinks. If it says pink, I just want to see a little bit more pink in my glass. I think this, to me, there are quite a few pinks on the market which are no pinker than that.
Absolutely.
I'd much rather say Blanc de Noir. It's not pink, it's Blanc de Noir.
I totally agree.
Now, this one interesting thing about this is I had these in the fridge for about 3 hours, took them out, opened them and tried them. And this Blanc de Noir at ex-fridge temperature, I found a little too reserved, a little too dry, a little too austere. Now it's warmed up, I would think, by 3 or 4 degrees to just quite cold rather than genuinely cold. It seems to have spread its flavors, and I think it's much more effective now at not quite so cold a temperature.
That's a very, very good point, Oz. And I think for our listeners and our followers, in general terms, with all white wines, is it not a good idea just to, obviously we keep them in the fridge or in the cellar, whatever, to take them out of the fridge for half an hour before we drink them? That's right across the board with white wine.
Yeah. Or keep them in the fridge for half an hour less.
Yeah.
But ideally, it's a very inexact science. Yeah. How long in the fridge? I mean, how good is your fridge? How have your kids been in playing around with the thermostat? We don't know. So when you take it out, this now is pleasantly cold on my hand. When I took it out half an hour ago, it was really quite chilly. And I do think when a wine is of high quality, and particularly wines made out of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, they're two wonderful grape varieties. They don't actually need to be quite so cold any more than if you had a good Chardonnay or a good Pinot Noir table wine, you wouldn't freeze the life out of it. If it was a Seyval Blanc or a Bacchus or something, you might say, let's get the temperature really far down. So I think this is now showing at a slightly warmer, it's still quite cold, but it's a warmer temperature. It's showing much more personality than it did just out of the fridge. But it's still...
I totally agree with that. I really, as it gets warmer, you can start to pick up, certainly my perception of the Pinot Meunier. So that perception of jamminess is starting to come through. And I really like Pinot Meunier. I think it's underrated in that it's always underrated, right? But it is underrated and just does give you that extra dimension of red fruit, of jam.
That's right. And I mean, I noticed on their back labels, by the way, their tasting notes are wonderfully fanciful on their back labels. Have you read them? There are all kinds of stuff going on here, which I've never heard of. But they do talk about slightly jammy, compote-y kind of things. I don't know what this one particularly says.
Baked Braben
apples and a textured mousse of Morello cherries with a plum compote finish. Well, whatever that means, I think what it means in our language, Kieron, is you were picking up that slight Meunier jamminess, which is actually an important part of the flavour.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to the rosé. The rosé 2017. So the first two wines we tried were 2016. This is 2017.
Different sort of year. From what I remember, we're now starting to get into this sequence that we've been starting to have recently of much hotter spells in the summer. And that, by the way, look at that colour. See, I think that's a really nice colour. It's got a little bit of cherry, a little bit of strawberry, and in looking at it on your screen, Charlie, with your bigger glass, just a hint of maturity, even though it's only 3 years old.
Yes.
And I think that's a delightful colour for a pink wine. And to be honest, if I was a consumer buying a bottle of pink wine, I sort of want it to be slightly pink.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of debate about, well, there isn't in the winemaking world, there is no debate, but as you say, the consumer likes pink, and you know, pink sparkling should come in a dark bottle because of light strike.
Absolutely.
And so, I'm not sure you've come across too much light strike, but certainly as a producer, as a maker, you certainly know the difference between wine which is stored in light and wine which isn't stored in light. And those dark bottles really do protect it, protect the colour, protect the aroma, and protect the flavour. So totally important. And it's so nice when you actually open the bottle to know it's pink.
Yeah. And that very slight maturity on it is just merely losing some of its purpley pink and gaining that slightly more. It's in a way, it's slightly more, what is it, strawberryish? I suppose what you'd say in the old-fashioned terms, you'd start talking about onion skin and all those sorts of things, but it's not really that far. It's still pink.
I'm now stuck on their back label, so I'm certainly getting cranberries and red currant. I'm not sure about Japanese wine brews.
I was wondering, I popped down to my local supermarket and asked for a punnet of Japanese wine brews straight away. Wine brews. And quince. Quince is a fascinating flavour. I think it's the kind of flavour you often only find if it's been suggested to you. Because quince jam is, to me, it's the flavour of maiden aunts. My maiden aunts, by the way, 3 of my maiden aunts lived within about 15 miles of this vineyard. And they would do 2 things. They'd make quince jelly and they would make seed cake. And those 2 flavors for me are allied with sort of tiny little maiden aunts, all smelling slightly of mothballs, but all as sweet as anything, giving you cups of tea and cheese, bread and butter with quince jelly on it, and then a slice of seed.
Dressed in tweed and held together by a very nice brooch.
Pretty much. And there were 3 of them all living together at Pevensey.
I think this wine. I think this wine's seriously good, though. As a you know, I know we're approaching the Christmas season, but this would be perfect, wouldn't it? As Christmas pre-lunch, post-lunch, during lunch, whatever it might be.
And also, nicely about the place,
I would agree with that. This is a wine I would drink 12 months of the year, rather than when we're sort of supposed to drink rosé in the summer. This is a great wine for Christmas. Great wine.
I think it has more fruit flavour than the previous 2. I still find all 3 of these wines are very definitely on the dry side. So some people would like them better dry. Some people would like a bit more richness in them. But this one does have a finish, which is slightly more of strawberries. It's got a little bit of a floral lift. On all 3 of these wines, there's just a hint of something floral going on, which I hope, as the vineyards develop and things, if this is the style that's going to come off those vineyards, it's exciting, because anything floral as a floral lift, I think is a completely delightful thing in a wine.
Okay, so is it time now that we should be joined by Mark and Sarah Driver, the owners and founders of this vineyard?
I think we've got Mark. Let's find out. Let's find out. Oh, hi, Mark. I think you're on mute.
Hiya.
Mark.
Mark.
Mark,
how are you?
Very good.
Forever Thirsty. Welcome to Forever Thirsty. I'm Charlie Womersley, and obviously you know Kieron very well, and obviously Oz. So we're delighted to have you with us to talk about your wines and all things Rathfinny. So, Oz, let's get cracking.
Well, it's lovely to see you, Mark. I hope that the cold weather is getting rid of all your bugs and things in Sussex nice and early. But one of the things people may not realise what a spectacular vineyard that you've developed, and a considerable size. So, for a fellow who 10 years ago wasn't anything to do with wine at all, from what I can remember, can you tell me something about why you decided to have a vineyard when you could have done anything in your post-business life, and you decided to have a vineyard?
That's the question I ask every day of the week, Oz. I think the main thing is that I retired from the city or in investment management at a very young age. I was only 46. So you can work out how old I am now. But that tender age, I felt I was too young to do nothing, and I love wine, and I've always drunk wine. I've always been a collector of wine. So I've been collecting wine for close to 30 years, and so I was always interested in doing something in wine. And back in 1990, I went to New Zealand for the first time, and I considered the idea of setting up a vineyard then, but I didn't have the money. You need a certain amount of capital to set up a vineyard, particularly on a commercial scale. So it took us 30 odd years to get to that stage, and here we are. We have a lovely vineyard in East Sussex, on the South Downs.
Why didn't you go back to
Mark? Hi,
yes.
By the way. Hello.
Hi,
how are you?
Very good.
I'm not going to ask the question you told me not to ask, but I would like to know how the first 10 years have been, and what surprised you about the wine industry, or has it been what you expected?
A good question, and thank you for not answering that question as to why I'm not sitting on a boat in the Caribbean. But I would say that the thing that surprised me is how friendly everybody is, and it's a lovely industry to be involved in. Everybody's very supportive. People are around the globe are very helpful, very keen to help you, to provide advice. Some of it not as useful as others, but it's lovely to get that, and to get that friendly advice from people. In terms of what surprised me, I would just say you have to be very patient in this game, and that's something which I haven't really had that. So I've had to learn patience. I've had to learn that everything costs twice as much as you initially expect, and takes probably twice as long to do. So everything's evolves, and things do evolve, and you have to be prepared to make some difficult decisions about what you're going to do and what you're going to plant. But everything has taken us a little bit longer than I anticipated.
Mark, the Rathfinny site is a impressive site. you look at it and say, these beautiful chalk soils, you're right down near the sea. This ought to be full of vineyards, and it's not. There's Peter Hall at Breaky Bottom, a few miles further over, making wonderful wines and has done for years. It seems to me that the South Downs, even though right next to Eastbourne and Brighton and Seaford, is a wild place. Is that fair?
Well, I think myself and Peter have sites which have, we're in hollows, we're in bottoms. So across the South Downs, there are all these things called bottoms. So Peter Hall makes a wine called Breaky Bottom. And all these dips in the South Downs are called bottoms. So just behind us is somewhere called France Bottom, which is where during the Napoleonic Wars, the British used to captured sailors and soldiers used to be deposited in France Bottom, just behind us. And we're in an area, we're in a fold in the South Downs, which gives you that protection from those sea breezes, because you need that protection. So vines love breeze, they love air movement to keep them disease free. But equally, you've got to protect them from the worst of the winds. And we're very fortunate to be in a lovely fold in the South Downs, which is protected by a ridge of land in front of us, which is about a little over 100 meters high. So it sort of gives us that protection. So I think that's possibly the reason. I think the other reason is that land just doesn't come up for sale. So we were really lucky in finding Rathfinny, which was the name of the original farm, because this was the first farm of this scale which had come up for sale in the last 10 years. In fact, in the last 20 years, there have only been 2 farms that have come up for sale in the last 10 years of this scale in the whole of East and West Sussex. So they just don't come up. Most land just gets passed on from generation to generation. So I think that's the main reason. It's just the land just doesn't come up for sale.
How did you find it then?
Did you? Sorry,
Well, we contacted 2 agents back in 2009 and got them to look for land for us. And must admit, we visited various different sites in West Sussex, in Hampshire, in East Sussex. We were looking for something which was a minimum of 250 acres, because I felt that was the sort of minimum that I wanted to be able to eventually plant. So something close to 100 hectares, in order for us to be properly commercial and to be able to produce a global brand. We looked at several sites. Some were a little bit frost prone, and that put me off. Others, we just wouldn't have got the building permission. And that's the big hurdle, really, is just getting planning permission to be able to build the buildings that you need to be able to make and store wine on site. I didn't want to be shifting everything off site and working off site, because I felt that would just be, I didn't feel that would be optimum really for the quality of the wine I wanted to make.
And other buildings that you had?
When you were...
Sorry.
No, I was going to ask a question about the team you've put together, Mark. And I very well remember being driven up to the site by yourself when it was just a field, a very large field. And I thought it was such an incredible project, and it is an incredible project. But I wanted to kind of know about the team you've put together, from your vineyard manager through to your winemaking team, and how you chose those guys. And did you choose them knowing, certainly with your winemaker, Jonathan, what style of wine he made, or were you just after the best guy and he was the best guy at the time?
Very good question. finding the right people is the most difficult thing in wine. In winemaking, it's really finding people who share your hopes and dreams, really. So we were very lucky to find Cameron Raucher, who runs our vineyard here. He was Young Viticulturalist of the Year in 2008, I believe, in Hawke's Bay. He worked in nurseries in Australia. He worked on organic and normal vineyards in New Zealand. And he brought this immense wealth of skill, which sadly at that time just wasn't really freely available in the UK. He also brought that real sort of, Antipodean can-do attitude, which you need really within the wine growing world. So he was employee number one. As I always believe that the most important thing is really, it's the vineyard. It's just getting fantastic grapes. If you can produce great grapes, ripe fruit, nice, clean, ripe fruit, then there should be no excuse to make some fantastic wines. Jonathan joined us 2 years later to help with the building of prior to the winery being built. So he helped us design the winery, and it was really set up with his ideas in place in terms of what he wanted to do. We spent quite a lot of time trolling across Europe, looking at different presses, different producers of tanks, and all the winery equipment. We spent a lot of time at trade shows, but in the car driving through France and Italy, looking at a lot of different producers of equipment. And again, he was somebody who had just this wealth of experience. His father worked for Moet. His grandfather had worked for Moet. And he he did his MSc, his master's in oenology in Epernay. So he had bubbles in the blood, but he then spent 10 years working in America, firstly for Kluge Estate, which is now Trump. And then he went across to the West Coast and worked for people like Newton Vineyard. So he made a mixture of different wines, but he wanted to make sparkling wine. And that was going to be his last project. That was going to be his project in America. But then we had the financial crisis. And then he started looking around the world for a project where he could get involved in to make sparkling wine, which is how we managed to find him. And we tempted him to come back to Europe. So those are the two key ones.
Obviously, being a trained winemaker yourself, Mark, there was never a moment where you thought, perhaps I'll have a Mark Driver Cuvée #1 or something similar, or perhaps it exists, where it's your wine and you fancy putting the coveralls on and putting a name to something.
Yeah. I've always felt that Kieron and I were on the same course at the same time at Plumpton College, as I'm sure he's mentioned, and I always felt at that time what I needed to learn was really how to make wine, how to grow grapes and how to make wine, so that I could help the people that I was going to employ. But my role is one very much as the sort of CEO, the person behind the scenes who's really driving the whole thing. And so I can have some really good conversations with Jonathan, with Cameron, the rest of our team in terms of how we make our wine, how we grow our grapes, and I can add value to that conversation. But ultimately, I leave those winemaking decisions to Jonathan, as I trust him to make the right decisions. And I think you'll agree, he makes some spectacular wines, as well as leaving those decisions through Cameron in terms of the clones that we're going to plant. Initially, I'd actually chosen the clones for the first year, but after that, I left that up to Cameron to then finesse what we were going to plant from then on.
So that's rootstocks and clones. Have you had to learn how as you go along? As I think you've had to learn how you go along about the local climatic conditions, for instance. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so no, very much so. So we clones and things are things you don't get taught at college. So I spent a lot of time visiting nurseries. In fact, it's interesting. We were told we were the only people they'd met from the UK in various different nurseries in France and Germany. And we went round and we looked at all these nurseries, and there are lots of these that actually they have trial vineyards. We went round and we were testing grapes from different vineyards and different clones, which helped inform our decision as to what we chose in terms of the clones. And as I was saying, Cameron's background was working in nursery, so he knew what we needed. And a nursery it's really clinical. It has to be really clean, so you don't get diseases passed on. So the nursery that actually we worked with in the early years, and we now use two. In fact, we use three, two in France and one in Germany. The German nursery was just so clean, and they produced some grapevines. Rootstocks is quite a simple decision because we're on chalk. So with chalk, you have a very high pH, so you need a rootstock to be able to cope with that high alkaline soil. So you don't get chlorosis. So we chose our rootstock, and then we chose various different clones. Some of them are German. They're Geisenheim clones. They're designed to be bred to try and produce early ripening grapes. Very open bunches, so you get less disease pressure, because in England, of course, we get quite a lot of rain throughout the year. And so you have to be able to deal with that high humidity. And then we used various other clones from France, both Champagne and Burgundy as well, so Dijon clones as well.
And you talk about the humidity there. So is the wind on the south coast both a blessing and a curse at the same time?
Yeah, very much. The wind is our friend, really, because we get incredibly disease-free grapes. We get virtually no botrytis, very little botrytis. We get a little bit of powdery mildew, but only really in the areas which have less wind, so closer to the windbreaks. So we've planted over 10,000 trees as windbreaks every 100 meters. And they really help to slow the wind down, which is what you want. You want breeze throughout a vineyard. You don't want to be in just a dull spot, because it'll just stay fairly damp. So you want that breeze, but equally you want to slow it down, which is what we did by planting the windbreaks, the trees.
And what approach do you take to sustainability or any kind of possibility of organic production?
Well, as I said, Cameron worked for an organic grape producer in New Zealand, in Hawke's Bay. So he uses and brings the best of those practices together with conventional vineyard practices. So there are certain key chemicals which are actually really good and targeted at reducing risk of things like certain mildews, powdery and downy mildew, which we haven't experienced on site to date. But at the same time, we use an awful lot of organic practices as well. So we use a lot of things like seaweed fertilizers, which are really good as nutritional sprays, foliar sprays. We're very keen on sustainability, and we're midway through the process of being inducted into something called B Corp, which is a firm-wide sustainability measure, which is very, very strict. And we're hoping that by early next year, we'll be a B Corp member, which will mean that we have a sustainability tag. We do a lot of other things. I think as one focuses on the vineyard to do with sustainability, but there's a lot more things you can do within the winery. So wineries use an awful lot of water. So for every liter of wine that you make, with white wine, you generally use about 3 liters of water. With a red wine, you'll use up to 8 or sometimes 12 litres of water to make a red wine. And that wine, the water that goes away has to be treated. So we set up our own water treatment plant here. So we're self-sufficient on water. We have our own borehole. We pull water from that borehole. We treat it. We use it in the winery. We use it across the estate. And then it's treated in our own water treatment plant on site. We also have a lot of photovoltaic cells, which we use to help power the winery. We're not completely self-sufficient as we're in a national park. So we were unable to put enough PV cells down. But they supply, I'd say, a little over half of what we use within the winery. So we use a lot of practices which give us that sustainability, as well as other things, so things like bottles. Your choice of bottle is really, really important. If you look at our bottle, it's a dark bottle, and it was chosen specifically because it's dark, and therefore you've got a greater chance of having recycled glass. The company who produced it guaranteed that it's a minimum of 80% recycled glass, which was important. But it's the dark glass which gives us that protection from light as well. And a sparkling wine, which is we just produce vintage wines. These wines are going to stay in the bottle for a minimum of 3 to 4 years before they're drunk. Therefore, it's really important that we protect the wine, the liquid within the bottle. So we're keen on that. The bottles themselves are actually on the lighter side. They're not the lightest sparkling wine bottle that you can buy, but they're one of the lightest, which again is a sign of help thinking about sustainability.
Now, there's a movement towards non-vintage or multi-vintage in England at the moment, has been for some years. Are you going to make non-vintage, or are you going to stick with vintage?
No, we're going to stick with vintage. I personally think that non-vintage or multi-vintage was really, it was an accident of the past. So it really started, as I understand it, back at the turn of the last century, the sort of 1910, 1920s, when there were some very poor years in Champagne. And therefore they held back some vintages from previous years, and they blended those together to make this non-vintage. And then it became quite an easy thing to do, to blend these wines. So you have something called a non-vintage. In my mind, I think you should always celebrate vintage. To me, it's about celebrating the quality of a wine produced from any one year. Because we own all our vineyards, we can dictate the yields that we pull from those vineyards. Therefore, we've got a real ability to be able to ensure that we get really nice ripe grapes year upon year, because we can green harvest. We're not really looking at we're not just looking for yield. We're looking for quality of grapes. Charlie, go ahead.
No, I was just indicating to Kieron, but I'm fascinated by what you're doing. Alfriston is where I used to go with my grandparents for cream teas. It's a lovely part of the world.
Yeah.
But I'm finding these wines, particularly the rosé, which I'm enjoying now, as a wine that I wouldn't normally drink in the summertime. It's very much, you could drink this 12 months of the year. I'm going to have some of this for Christmas.
Charlie, I completely agree. I think rosé, I'd say particularly our rosé, but a rosé sparkling wine is the ideal wine to drink on Christmas Day, throughout the meal. A rosé is such a food-friendly wine because it's great to start off with. It's a lovely celebratory drink.
Yeah.
But equally, it works so well with so many different dishes. It would work really well with a turkey or with chicken. It works with lighter meats as well. We serve it with things like venison, with lamb, because it's over 60% of this is made up by Pinot Noir. Then there's a good chunk of Pinot Meunier. So there are two black grapes, red grapes in there, and then you've got a smattering of 20% or so of Chardonnay to give it a little bit of structure and a little bit of mouthfeel and that lovely aftertaste of all those stone fruit. But I think it's a great wine, and I completely agree. I think it's a wine for all seasons.
Well, Mark, it's been absolutely fantastic to chat with you, particularly with Oz and Kieron here, and I wish you every success with your venture. And we're looking forward to seeing your wines on the Forever Thirsty website, of course, so that we can start selling them for you. I think, you know, and all I can say is, for now, please remain forever thirsty.
Forever thirsty.
You.
Cheers, Mark.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, it's Charlie the Wine. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and would like to learn a little bit more about the services that me, Charlie the Wine, can offer, why not head over to my website, www.foreverthirsty.co.uk, and just see all the wonderful offerings I can help with. But please remain forever thirsty.